Ongoing blackouts are harming the already strained economy. Some businesses have to shut down due to the power cuts. Eskom is currently implementing stage 5 blackouts. One energy expert says the power cuts are costing the economy some 10 billion rand a day. David Lipschitz is joining us now. I'd like to discuss this matter further. David, good afternoon. Welcome to Today on eNCA. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, it's becoming more and more clear that these ongoing power cuts that the country is subjected to are really damaging the country's economic prospects unless something can be done as of yesterday.
Hi, Dan. Yes, good to be on again. Yes, I think everybody wants to know what we can do as a nation, to fix the problem. We're waiting for Eskom to fix the problem. And as we've seen, every time Eskom get a price increase since 2008, we get less electricity because they're not motivated and incentivized to earn more and get higher salaries based on higher electricity sales. So it's easier just to increase tax, which in this case is an electricity tax, to get paid rather than to do your jobs properly. The way to solve the problem, in my opinion, is for big business to go to government and say, we want to become power stations. And then for the employees of those businesses to make electricity that those big businesses buy across a virtual grid. That's on the one side. On the other side of the equation, we need Eskom to make sure that its supply chain is activated and correct. We've heard of coal theft. We've heard of rocks being put in the coal quality is not right. We've heard of water in the coal, and that the coal is wet, and so there have to be systems to take the wetness out of the coal, and there's all kinds of problems. This graph that I produced that you're showing now is where my 10 billion comes from. So what this is this is a project management type graph that we would produce for long-term or even short-term projects. And the blue line is, can we go back to that? The blue line is the baseline of the project.
Just hold on, David. Just hold on. Can we please show the graph again? Please, I'm just checking to the technical team to make sure they stay with us. Thank you very much. You can speak to it again, David. You can continue.
Thanks, Dan. Great. So this is a baseline and actual curve that one would do in a project, whether the project is a 6-month IT project or a 20-year energy project, as in the case for Eskom. And you can see from the beginning, in about 2006, I'm just looking at the big graph on my screen, the blue line is the baseline, the blue-green line. That top curve is the baseline, and you can see that it goes up in 2013 when the first 2 units of Medupi were meant to come on stream. And then 2014 when the first unit of Kusile and the Ngula 3 units were meant to come on stream. And then 2015 when 2 more units of Medupi were meant to come on stream and 1 unit of Kusile. And then 2016 Medupi 1 unit, Kusile 2 units, and then 2017 Kusile 1 unit. So by 2018 at the latest, everything from a Medupi, Kusile, Grootvlei, and Ngula project should all have been on stream. The orange line is when Eskom actually told us that they had not just synchronized the unit with the grid, because they synchronize and then they have about 3 or 4 months of actually testing and making sure everything is optimal before they actually supply energy to the wider grid. And so the bottom line is when Eskom said that they were actually producing energy. But as we know, Medupi and Kusile are breaking as often as the old power stations. Now,
and sorry, David, and they are fairly new. I mean, looking at this graph, you can see the gap, and that gap is what is costing us. So the so-called load shedding is costing us.
Yes. So okay, before we even get to load shedding, what this graph shows is that Eskom are actually load shedding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the space in that gap. There's a big spreadsheet under this graph that you can't see, but the spreadsheet shows that gap is worth 40 trillion rand of GDP at about 75 rand a kilowatt hour. So, although electricity might be costing us 3 rand a kilowatt hour, whatever it's costing us, you buy electricity at 3 rand a kilowatt hour, you employ people, you make things, and the actual cost of the economy is about 75 Rand a kilowatt hour. So using that and going backwards in time and trying to bring everything into 2022 money, you get this 10 billion Rand a day of average cost to the economy. But so, Eskom should have about 60 gigawatts on the grid right now. They have 28 gigawatts before they do load shedding. And then when we have stage one, we have 27 gigawatts, stage 2, 26, and so on.
Yeah, the numbers are clear. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, thank you, David, for sharing this graph and explaining what the numbers mean and the gap means. But the reality, therefore, is that it's about 10 billion Rand a day that this is all costing us from your calculations. But also, it tells us, as you said, Eskom should be operating at a particular level in terms of output of the megawatts. But they are not. They are way below. Is that largely due to a lack of skills, lack of maintenance? What could be behind this?
So the 10 billion Rand a day is just this gap. There's additional cost to the economy when we actually have load shedding as we do now, stage 5 at the moment, where we are in Cape Town. So, there's a number of things. The one is the supply chain, the coal. In 2010, when I wrote on my blog for the first time that Medupi and Kusile would never operate, Eskom learned under apartheid when they needed forex. We exported our best quality coal. We learned how to take the tailings after washing the coal and taking the rubbish waste coal with very high amounts of ash and sulfur and so on. We learned how to put that into power stations and make it work. That required relatively low heat and low pressure to do that. And we had to spend a lot of time and money and energy learning, no pun intended, we had to learn how to actually make our boilers work in that environment. When the new government decided to install Medupi and Kusile, which are very high pressure and very high temperature systems, they need very fine tolerances. They can't handle the kind of coal we're putting into them. So the very first thing is that we need to fix the coal that's going into the power station. The next thing is that we should have realized that it's very difficult to get inputs and outputs to the middle of a very big 5-stack power station, 5-unit power station. So in 2010 or 2011, when we realized that we should have knocked out the middle one, yes, it would have cost us 10 billion Rand at the time, but we would have finished, 8 power stations, because we would have had 1, 2 on the one side, 1, 2 on the other side, and then Kusile the same. So we're not making the kinds of complex project management decisions that we need to make in this kind of environment. So these two things acting together are causing the kinds of strife that we have. The other thing that happens in South Africa is we don't understand that a power station, a big power station like Medupi, takes 25 years to break even. Eskom keeps saying we don't have a cost reflective tariff. Now, that's, to some extent true, but to some extent not true, because when you finance a power station of that magnitude, which takes 10 years to build, assuming that they finished it on time, then, from the time that it's built till the time it's going to go and make a profit is 25 years plus 10 years, 35 years. So the JP Morgans of the world, the big investment banks, they understand that these power stations are going to last 50 years. And for the first 25 years, it's going to cost them money. And after that, they're going to make such a lot of money. You have no idea how much money is made in these power stations once they've paid back.
So David, the picture painting is very clear that there's a big challenge in the understanding of how to be managing these stations as well and charging us higher tariffs all the time as Eskom goes to NERSA even soon. But the president flew back from London after attending Queen Elizabeth II's funeral yesterday, and now there's meetings. There's task teams, there's meetings and stuff. There's a short-term need here for us to keep the lights on. And, of course, there's a medium, long-term sustainable solution that has to come. In the short term, what do you think the president should get his team to focus on to sort this problem now?
If you look back a few years, you'll discover the Eskom war room. I went to a presentation at Eskom 5-6 years ago when the Eskom war room was mooted. And the president created his task team and said, we're going to fix the system. But the system requires fixing in a number of places. Eskom are experts at making coal and nuclear and those kinds of big power stations. They're not experts at making renewable energy power stations. The next thing is the IPPs that are being put in place in so-called independent power producers, an IPP. They're not really independent. They're just off-balance sheet finance for Eskom. Because Eskom are entering into a tariff structure with them for 20 years at a certain tariff, at a certain load, at a certain contract value. If they can't supply, there's penalties. So it's a 20-year contract, and it's just, as I said, off-balance sheet finance. What we really need is we need people like me who've been saying to Eskom, you know, since 2008, I can supply you with electricity. I've been saying to the city of Cape Town, I can supply you with electricity now. You know, the PV panels up till recently were all facing north. And then there's something called flattening the curve, which, you know, the pharmaceutical industry stole from the renewable industry. It's about bringing down the midday peak by making your solar panels face east and west and even south. And that's called lengthening the solar day. There's a so-called duck curve where there's a big demand in the morning, then there's a lot of energy in the day that we don't need, and then there's a big demand in the evening. That's the duck curve. Okay. Because it looks like a duck.
So, yeah.
Now,
so David,
if you...
Just very briefly, we run out of time now in terms of the show, but very briefly, are you saying that the focus should really be on finding immediate, easy solutions that Eskom can do so that we can keep the lights on?
I think that, you know, the government mooted Eskom 2. Eskom 2 for me is 100 utilities. You know, it's the Sanlam utility, it's the Old Mutual utility, it's the Standard Bank utility. It's every company should be a utility with their staff. That's on the one side. Eskom must focus on making its existing power station fleet work. That's all Eskom should do.
Okay.
You know, people are saying, should Eskom be privatized? It doesn't need to be privatized. It must just focus on its job. What's its job? Make electricity for smelters, big business, you know, metalwork, car manufacturers, which obviously homeowner electricity can't make, but homeowner electricity can make all the rest of electricity that South Africa needs. Okay, so there's a two-phase approach.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. David Lipschitz there is an economist and, of course, an expert with the energy matters. You can hear and you can feel the passion there, and the ideas are just coming out. Eskom must just focus on doing its job of making sure that there is electricity coming out of the existing power stations. I mean, you've built Kusile, you've built Medupi, and no power is really coming out there at the level at which the economy and the country requires today.